That's how it began. One quiet morning in my perfect suburban neighborhood, I heard a scream, my daughter's scream, and when I ran outside, I saw her on the ground, an HOA enforcer standing over her, his hand still on her arm. The neighbors were watching. The president was smiling, and I was about to show them something they would never forget. Welcome to HOA Stories. I'm Daniel. I live in a quiet cul-de-sac just outside of Virginia, on paper. I'm a regular father, homeowner, neighbor. But before this life, I served my country overseas as a Navy SEAL. I thought I left the battles behind me, but then I learned. Sometimes the fiercest wars happen right here. In suburbia, I thought suburban life would be peaceful. Quiet mornings, trimmed lawns, kids riding bikes in circles. But peace is always an illusion when power is in the wrong hands. The HOA president lived 3 houses down. Her name was Mrs. Whitaker. Short gray hair, sharp glasses, always a clipboard pressed tight to her chest. Her smile never reached her eyes. It was the kind of smile that warned you before she even spoke. Every neighbor feared her, not because she was violent, but because she controlled every inch of our lives. Mailbox height, the shade of green allowed on the lawn, even the color of the curtains you could hang in the front window. She called it community standards. I called it tyranny in the suburbs. At first, I played along. I kept my grass short, paid the monthly dues, nodded politely when she waved her clipboard at me. I thought, maybe if I stay invisible, she'll pass by my house like smoke in the air. But power is hungry, and hungry people always come knocking that morning. The sun was just breaking through the clouds. I was making coffee in the kitchen when I heard it, the sound that twists a father's heart into stone, my daughter. I heard her scream. I dropped the mug. Coffee spilled across the counter, and I ran out the door barefoot. She was on the ground, her workout clothes covered in grass stains. Her face red with shock. Standing over her was one of Whitaker's men, a heavy-set enforcer with HOA stitched across his black vest. He had her wrist in his grip like she was a criminal. Behind him, Mrs. Whitaker stood with 3 board members, and further back, 2 police cars with officers leaning against them, watching, not moving a finger. It wasn't law enforcement. It was theater, a show of power, and my daughter was the stage. I clenched my fists. But for a moment, I stayed still. I needed to see, needed to hear. The enforcer barked at her. "Your car is parked 2 inches over the sidewalk. Violation of safety code." 2 inches. That was it. And for 2 inches, they dragged her to the ground like a thief. My daughter's voice cracked as she tried to argue. "It's just 2 inches. This is crazy." But the grip on her wrist only tightened. That's when I stepped forward, let her go. The enforcer turned, and for the first time I saw his face up close. A man built like a wall, shaved head, eyes cold with arrogance. He didn't loosen his grip. He smirked instead and said, "Sir, you're interfering with HOA enforcement." Mrs. Whitaker added her voice, smooth and venomous. "You signed the agreement when you bought the house. We own this neighborhood." I laughed once. Low. Dangerous. She had no idea. The man yanked my daughter's arm again, and that was it. The soldier in me woke up, the part of me I had buried deep, the part that knew exactly how to end men like him. I stepped close, inches away, and whispered so only he could hear, "You're making a mistake." He didn't listen. Power makes men deaf. He raised his free hand like he was going to shove me back, but my reflex, this were faster than his thought. I grabbed his wrist, twisted, and in one move, he was on his knees gasping for air. The other enforcers froze. The police shifted uncomfortably but did not move, and Whitaker's smile cracked for the first time. My daughter scrambled to her feet, eyes wide, looking at me like she had never seen me before, because in that moment, I wasn't her suburban father. I was the man I used to be, the man who had fought in deserts and jungles, the man who had broken bones to protect brothers in arms. Whitaker finally found her voice. "You will regret this," she hissed, her glasses glinting under the morning sun. But I only looked at her, calm, steady, and said, "No, you will." The neighborhood had gathered now. Phones were out, cameras recording. For the first time, the power balance shifted. It wasn't Whitaker controlling the story anymore. It was me, and as I stood there, holding down her strongest enforcer with one hand, I realized something. This was not about grass height, or mailbox colors, or parked cars. This was about control. And once people like her get control, they never give it back willingly. I lifted my eyes to the neighbors, to the officers still frozen by their cars. The enforcer on the ground was groaning, his pride broken before his body was. But I didn't take my eyes off Whitaker. She wasn't afraid. Not yet. Her lips pressed tight, her eyes sharp like knives. The kind of woman who believed rules were more powerful than fists. The neighbors whispered among themselves. Some cheered under their breath. Others shook their heads, afraid to get involved. But every phone pointed in my direction. The power of the HOA had always been silence, intimidation, paperwork in the mail. Now the silence was broken. The control was cracking. Whitaker raised her voice so the crowd could hear. This man is violent, dangerous, unfit to live in this neighborhood. Her words cut through the air like poison, but I knew her game. Label me the villain. Paint me as the threat. It was easier than admitting the truth. The officers by the cars finally moved closer, not to stop me, but to keep up appearances. They were local. They knew Whitaker well. The HOA sponsored their charity events, their holiday dinners. Favor traded for silence. But when they looked at me, they hesitated, because something about me told them I wasn't bluffing. My daughter clung to my arm, her eyes still wide, her voice trembling. "Dad, let's just go inside." But I shook my head slowly. No, not today. I stood tall. Let the enforcer crawl back to his feet. He rubbed his wrist, glaring at me with hate. But behind that hate was something else. Fear. Whitaker stepped forward, clipboard raised like a weapon. "You violated Section 14. Homeowner assault. Your house will be fined and seized if necessary." The crowd gasped. Seized. She said it so casually, like taking away a man's home was the same as trimming a hedge. That's when I spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. "You don't own this neighborhood. You don't own these people. And you sure as hell don't own me." For a moment, silence. Even the birds seemed to stop. Whitaker's smile returned, thin and bitter. She motioned to her board members, and they stepped forward, all in black vests with HOA printed bold across their chests. 5 of them now, circling like wolves around prey. The crowd held its breath. The officers crossed their arms, still doing nothing. And my daughter whispered, "Dad, please." But I wasn't afraid. I had seen worse than this. Men with real weapons. Men who didn't care about rules or clipboards compared to them. These were children in costumes. The tallest of the enforcers stepped up, his voice low. "Meant only for me. You can fight one of us, maybe 2, but you can't fight us all." I leaned in closer, let him see the calm in my eyes. "That's where you're wrong." He clenched his fists, and for a split second, I thought the storm would break right there, but it didn't, because something else stopped him. The neighbors, they weren't whispering anymore. They were shouting, "Leave them alone. This is wrong. We saw everything." Phones still raised. Voices louder now. The crowd had chosen sides, and for the first time, Whitaker realized her power was slipping. She raised her hands to calm them, her voice trembling under the weight of defiance. "Order must be kept, or the community will fall apart." But no one listened, because the truth was plain as day. It wasn't about order, it was about control. The tension hung heavy. The enforcers stood ready, the crowd stood louder, and I stood unshaken. I looked at Whitaker, at the enforcers, at the officers pretending to be blind. The street was no longer quiet. The calm of suburbia had broken apart like glass under a hammer. Voices rose, phones recorded. Neighbors peeked out from behind curtains, and in the center of it all, Whitaker stood like a queen watching her soldiers. She wanted me to bend. She wanted me to apologize, pay a fine, disappear into the shadows of obedience. But I couldn't. Not after what I saw them do to my daughter. The tallest enforcer clenched his fists, ready to charge, his jaw tight, his chest puffed, trying to look like a warrior. But I could see through him. A man used to intimidating old couples about mailbox paint, not a man used to real fights. I took one step forward, and suddenly the whole circle shifted. 5 of them around me now, tightening the ring. The crowd gasped. The tension burned. My daughter grabbed my arm. "Dad, please, don't do this." Her voice cracked with fear. She had seen glimpses of who I was before, but never like this. I kept my voice calm, steady, almost whispering. They think this is about a car on the sidewalk, but it's not. This is about power. Whitaker's smile flickered because I spoke the truth out loud, the truth she tried to bury. Under paperwork and petty rules, she snapped back quickly. "Take him down. Show everyone what happens when you fight the board." For a second, time froze. 5 men leaned forward, fists tight, muscles tense, but they didn't move. Not yet, because the crowd shouted again. "Leave him alone. This is abuse. You can't touch him." Their voices grew louder, echoing across the cul-de-sac. And that noise made the enforcers hesitate. They weren't used to being challenged in public. Their power worked best in silence. When neighbors were too afraid to speak, I looked at each one of them, straight in the eyes, and I let my past rise up inside me. The missions, the nights in foreign deserts, the training that taught me never to break, that energy filled my stance, my eyes, my presence, and they felt it. I saw the doubt in their shoulders, the hesitation in their feet. But one of them, the youngest, tried to prove himself. He lunged at me with a clumsy punch. I moved before he even knew I had moved, a sidestep, a twist of his wrist, and he hit the ground with a thud that shook the pavement. The crowd erupted, gasps, cheers, phones shaking as they recorded. Whitaker's face went pale, her grip on the clipboard trembling. Another enforcer charged, bigger, stronger, angrier. He swung wild. I ducked, drove my shoulder into his chest, and sent him stumbling back into a parked SUV. The sound of his body slamming metal echoed down the street. Now there were only 3 standing, but none of them moved. They looked at me, then at the crowd, then back at Whitaker, and for the first time, they questioned if this fight was worth it. Whitaker's voice cracked with desperation. "Do your jobs. Now." But no one moved. Not the officers, not the board members, not the crowd. Her power was crumbling before her eyes. I stood tall in the center of the circle, my breath hung calm, my body steady, and I spoke so everyone could hear. This is what happens when you let petty tyrants take over your life. First, it's grass height. Then it's mailbox colors. Then it's your home. And today, it was my daughter. The silence after my words felt like thunder. Every neighbor who had been afraid suddenly saw it clear. This wasn't about order. It was about control. And once you give control to people like Whitaker, they take everything. The officers finally stepped forward, hands raised like they wanted peace. One of them muttered, "Let's calm this down." But his eyes told the truth. He didn't want to fight me either. He saw what I could do. Whitaker's face twisted into rage. "You will pay for this. Fines, lawsuits. You'll lose your home." I stepped closer to her, so close I could see the sweat on her forehead, and I whispered low, "Just for her, you already lost." The crowd erupted again, this time not in gasps, but in cheers. They clapped, they shouted. Some even laughed at her, because the queen of the neighborhood had been dethroned in broad daylight. Whitaker turned red. She raised her clipboard like it was a sword, shaking it at me. "This isn't over." Her voice cracked, but her eyes betrayed her. She was scared. The remaining enforcers stepped back, pretending to fix their vests. The 2 I dropped were still groaning on the ground. And the police? They turned, walked back to their cars, pretending the whole thing wasn't their problem. The crowd began to close in. Neighbors who once whispered now shouted boldly, "You can't do this to us anymore. We're done being afraid. Step down, Whitaker." Her board members shifted nervously, their loyalty fading fast, because loyalty follows power. And today, the power wasn't hers. My daughter clung tighter to me, her voice still trembling. "Dad, what happens now?" I looked around the neighborhood, at the faces of people who had lived under fear for years, at the woman who had ruled them with a clipboard, at the enforcers who now looked like Ken puppets. And I asked myself the same question. What happens when fear is broken? When silence turns to defiance? When an entire neighborhood finally sees the truth? The answer wasn't clear yet, but one thing was certain. This cul-de-sac would never be the same again. The street was still buzzing, neighbors whispering, phones recording, children peeking from behind parents. But Whitaker did not leave. She stood there, red-faced, trembling with rage, her clipboard clutched so tight her knuckles turned white. I thought she might back down, but people like her never back down. They retreat, they regroup, and they attack from another angle. She pointed at me, her voice sharp and cutting through the air. You may have humiliated my board, but this neighborhood runs on rules, and you will learn, no man is above them. The crowd booed her. Some laughed out loud for the first time in years. People weren't afraid to mock the queen, but I didn't laugh. I knew her kind. She wasn't beaten, not yet. And a wounded enemy is more dangerous than one in control. The officers drove off without a word. The enforcers limped away, one clutching his wrist, the other holding his ribs. The neighborhood slowly drifted back to their lawns and porches, but I could still feel their eyes on me. I had lit something in them, something that wouldn't go out easily. That night, the war changed. I sat at the kitchen table, my daughter icing her arm. She tried to smile, tried to act like it didn't hurt, but I could see the fear behind her eyes, not of me, but of what might come next. Dad, she's not going to stop, is she? Her voice was soft, tired. I shook my head slowly. No, she'll come harder. And I was right. The next morning, I opened my mailbox to a stack of letters thick as a brick. Violation notices, late fee warnings, fines stacked on fines for things that didn't even exist, unapproved mailbox color, fence 2 inches too tall, excessive grass height, each one signed with Whitaker's perfect, venomous handwriting. It was her revenge, paperwork instead of fists. She wanted to drown me in rules until I broke. I almost laughed, because she didn't know who she was dealing with. I had lived through worse than letters and fines, but still, I knew the danger. Fines lead to liens lead to losing the home. And my home, my daughter's safety, was not something I could gamble with. I went door to door that evening. Neighbors opened their doors cautiously. At first, they whispered, "She's going to ruin you. You should just pay." But then others leaned in closer. Braver now. She fined me for a bird feeder. She threatened to seize my house over a basketball hoop. She doubled my dues after I complained. The stories poured out like water from a broken pipe. Everyone had been a victim. Everyone had stayed silent. Until now, I looked at them one by one, and I said, if we don't stop her together, she'll keep feeding on all of us. The spark in their eyes grew brighter, because deep down, they were tired of living in fear of clipboards and threats. The next HOA meeting was 3 days later. Normally, only a handful of neighbors showed up, but this time, the room was packed wall to wall. People stood in the back, some even outside the door trying to listen. Whitaker sat at the head table, her board lined up beside her like silent soldiers. Her smile returned, but it was thinner now. Stretched tight over her nerves, she banged the gavel. Order, order. Her voice wavered just slightly. I sat in the front row, my daughter beside me. The room buzzed with tension, with energy, the kind of energy you feel right before a storm. She started the meeting with her usual words. Community harmony. Rules protect us. Order keeps us safe. But the crowd didn't nod like they used to. They stared cold, waiting. Then she moved to me, her voice sharp, accusing. This homeowner assaulted our enforcement officers, endangered public safety, and has violated no less than 12 community codes in the last month. Gasps filled the room, but not against me, against her. A neighbor stood up. You're lying. We saw what happened. Another voice from the back. You let your men attack his daughter. Another. You've been fining us all into the ground for years. Whitaker's smile faltered. She slammed the gavel again. Order. I am in charge here. But the crowd didn't quiet. They grew louder, voices rising, anger boiling over years of abuse. One man held up a stack of letters. All of us have these. You think we're blind. Another woman shouted. You threatened to take my house because of Christmas lights. The board members shifted in their seats, their loyalty unraveling in front of the mob. Whitaker banged the gavel so hard the handle cracked. "Enough. Sit down or face penalties." I rose to my feet slowly. The room fell silent. Every eye turned to me. I walked to the front, stood inches from her table, and spoke in a voice calm but heavy with truth. "You built your power on fear, but fear only works when people stay quiet. And after what you did to my daughter, after what you've done to this whole neighborhood, no one is quiet anymore." The room erupted in cheers, clapping, shouting. The walls shook with it. Whitaker tried to shout over them, but her voice was lost in the storm. Her board looked at her, then at me, then at the crowd, and I saw it happen in their eyes. They were done following her. The meeting broke down into chaos, people shouting demands, calling for her resignation, waving fines in the air like weapons. Whitaker's face turned pale, her power crumbling right in front of her. I leaned closer, my voice just for her. "You wanted a war. But this is what war looks like when people stop being afraid." She glared at me, hate burning in her eyes. "This isn't over," she whispered. I smiled faintly. "It's already over." The crowd pushed forward. Neighbors surrounded the table, shouting, recording, refusing to be silenced anymore. Whitaker clutched her broken gavel like a lifeline, but she looked small now, smaller than I had ever seen her. And as I stood there, with my daughter beside me, the neighbors at my back, I realized something. This fight was never about me alone. It was about everyone who had been bullied, fined, threatened, humiliated. It was about an entire community finally standing tall. But one question burned in my mind as I walked out of that meeting. The night after the meeting, the neighborhood felt different. For years, the streets had been silent. People keeping their heads down, afraid of letters and fines. But now, voices carried, laughter on porches, neighbors gathering in driveways, children playing without parents glaring at their watches. The fear had cracked, and once fear cracks, it never holds the same again. But I knew better than to believe it was finished. Whitaker was humiliated, cornered, but not gone. Her kind never just walk away. They cling to power with claws and teeth until someone rips it away completely. I sat at my kitchen table again. The pile of violation letters spread out before me, each one ridiculous, each one written with spite. But at the bottom of the stack, there was something new. A letter stamped with bold red ink, notice of intent to foreclose. My daughter saw it before I could hide it. Her eyes widened, her voice trembling. "Dad, can she really do this?" I clenched my jaw. She thinks she can. That was her next move. If she couldn't break me with fists, she would try to take my home through paper. It was the oldest trick of tyrants in suburbia: weaponize the rule book, drown the enemy in legal threats. I wasn't afraid for myself. I had lost homes before, lost more than homes in my time overseas. But this house, this roof over my daughter's head, this place where she laughed and dreamed, that wasn't hers to take. The next day, I met with neighbors again. Word had already spread about the foreclosure notice. Some were angry. Others were scared again. One old man shook his head. "She did the same thing to my brother 5 years ago. He lost his house and moved away." A woman with tired eyes clutched a folder of papers. "She's filed liens on half the block. If she gets away with this, we're all next." I looked around at them. These weren't soldiers. They were teachers, mechanics, retirees. But they were tired of being prey. And sometimes, tired people are the most dangerous of all. I told them what I knew. If she wants to fight with paperwork, then we fight back with truth. She hides behind the rule book, but we expose the corruption behind it. We spent hours gathering letters, fines, violations that made no sense, photos of lawns she fined but ignored when her friends did the same, records of dues that went missing, money that was never accounted for. It was all there, hidden in plain sight. But Whitaker wasn't just playing with paper, she was playing with minds. That night, I found a note taped to my door. No envelope, no signature, just 4 words written in thick black ink. "You can't protect her." My blood turned cold. This wasn't about cars or fences anymore. This was about fear. She was trying to break me through my daughter. I sat awake all night, every creak of the house setting me on edge. I checked the locks twice, 3 times. And still, I couldn't shake the feeling that eyes were watching from the dark. In the morning, I walked outside to find tire tracks carved across my lawn. Deep grooves, like someone had spun their wheels on purpose, and nailed into my mailbox post was another note. Leave, before it gets worse. The neighbors saw it. They gathered on the sidewalk, whispers turning to anger. She had crossed a line, and when tyrants crow, yes, lines, they often don't realize they've gone too far. That evening, we held a meeting in my garage, 30 people crammed inside, more standing in the driveway. They weren't afraid anymore. They were furious. One man slammed his fist against the workbench. She thinks she owns us. Well, maybe it's time we take back the HOA. Murmurs of agreement spread through the room. My daughter looked at me, hope in her eyes for the first time. Can we really do that? I nodded slowly. Yes, but it won't be easy. Taking back an HOA isn't just shouting at meetings, it's paperwork, elections, recalls, the same tools she used to trap us. We would use to set ourselves free. Revenge. By compliance, we formed committees, gathered signatures, studied bylaws line by line, every page that once chained us. We turned into a weapon against her. But Whitaker fought back harder. Cease and desist letters arrived at our doors. Threats of lawsuits piled up. Her enforcers drove past our houses at night, slow, headlights crawling like predators through the dark. She was playing psychological warfare now, not just fines, but fear. She wanted us to break before we could finish what we started. One night, as I walked my daughter to her car, we saw a shadow near the hedges, a man in black, camera in hand, snapping photos of us in our own yard. When I shouted, he ran to a waiting SUV and sped away, but not before I saw the letters stenciled on his vest, HOA. My daughter's voice shook. Dad, how far will she go? I looked at the tire tracks still scarred into my lawn, at the notes she had left, at the fear she was trying to plant in every home on the block, and I knew the answer, as far as we let her. The war wasn't just on paper anymore, it was in the air, in the shadows, in the fear she tried to spread through every family. But fear only works until people stop believing in it, and our neighborhood, they were done believing. We filed the recall petition 2 weeks later, more than enough signatures, more than enough proof. The day it was delivered, Whitaker's face drained of color. For the first time, she wasn't untouchable. But that night, as the papers were filed, a brick crashed through my front window. Wrapped around it was another note, scrawled in black ink. This ends with you. My daughter screamed. I pulled her close, glass crunching under our feet, and I realized something I had always known deep down. This wasn't just about rules anymore. This was war, and in war, there are no limits. The brick through my window changed everything. It wasn't just about rules anymore. It wasn't about lawn heights or mailbox colors. It was personal now. It was a warning, and it was war. My daughter swept the glass with trembling hands, her voice cracked. Dad, we can't live like this. I pulled her close, promised her I wouldn't let anyone hurt her again, but inside, I knew promises meant nothing without action. The recall petition was filed. Whitaker's empire was shaking, but she still had claws, and she was going to use every one of them the next morning. I received a letter thicker than all the others, not a fine this time, a lawsuit filed by the HOA against me personally, claims of assault, property damage, violation of contract, page after page of lies, twisted half-truths, designed to bury me in court. My daughter's face turned pale when she read it. She's trying to ruin you, I nodded. She's trying to scare us into quitting. But fear was a weapon I no longer carried. I called a lawyer, a neighbor's cousin who knew HOA law inside out. He flipped through the papers, shaking his head. This is aggressive, but it's sloppy. She's desperate, and desperate people make mistakes. Mistakes we could use, while Whitaker played her games with paper. Her enforcers returned to the streets, SUVs crawling past our houses, headlights flooding our driveways at midnight, notes taped to doors. Pay or lose, obey or leave. The kind of cheap intimidation tactics you'd expect from a gang, not from a homeowners association. But the neighborhood wasn't silent anymore. One by one, people stepped out onto porches when the SUVs rolled by. They filmed. They shouted back. They refused to hide. Whitaker wanted shadows. But we gave her light. The night before the court hearing, something happened I will never forget. I woke to the sound of footsteps in my yard. I grabbed the bat by the door, moved quiet, slow, and when I stepped outside, I saw them. Two men in black vests marked HOA crouched by my truck, one with a crowbar in hand, the other with a camera, trying to stage damage, trying to frame me for something new. I shouted. They froze. Then one swung the crowbar at me. Old instincts came alive. I blocked with the bat, twisted, and sent the weapon clattering across the driveway. The other man ran, but the first wasn't fast enough. I pinned him against the hood of my truck, his vest scraping metal. My arm pressed against his throat. His eyes went wide, fear pouring out of him. Whitaker told us, "Just scare you. Just take pictures." I leaned in close. "She should have told you who I am." I let him go. He stumbled, gasped for air, and sprinted into the night. My daughter ran outside, fear in her eyes. "Dad, what if they come back?" I looked at the broken crowbar on the ground. They will. The next day, court. The room smelled of paper and sweat. Whitaker sat across from me in a tailored suit, her hair perfect, her eyes cold. Her lawyer read from the pile of claims, trying to paint me as violent, unstable, a danger to the community. But when it was my turn, we laid out the evidence, the false fines, the missing funds, the intimidation notes, the videos neighbors had recorded of enforcers harassing families. The judge leaned forward, eyebrows raised. "This is highly irregular for a homeowners association." His voice cut like a blade. Whitaker shifted in her seat, sweat forming at her temple. Her lawyer stammered, tried to redirect. But the damage was done. The judge didn't dismiss the case entirely. He wanted a full investigation. But for Whitaker, that was enough to feel the ground slip beneath her feet outside the courthouse. Neighbors surrounded me. Some clapped me on the back. Others hugged my daughter. One old man whispered, "You gave us our voice back." But the war wasn't over. Whitaker still had her board, still had her enforcers, still had the shadows to work in. And that night, she reminded me of it as I walked to the mailbox. Another envelope waited, inside. Just one photo. My daughter walking alone to her car, on the back, written in red marker. "We see her." My hands shook with rage. This wasn't power anymore. This was obsession. I knew then. This would not end with papers or gavel strikes. This would end in the street, in the open, for everyone to see. The neighborhood gathered 2 nights later. We met in the cul-de-sac. More than 40 of us, men, women, kids sitting on shoulders. Everyone tired of the fear, tired of being watched. Whitaker arrived in her SUV. Enforcers piled out with her, black vests, arms folded. Smug looks like they still owned us. She stepped into the circle of streetlights, clipboard in hand. "This little rebellion ends tonight," she hissed, her voice dripping with venom. But the crowd didn't shrink back. They stepped forward. Voices rose. No more fines. No more threats. No more Whitaker. I stood at the front, my daughter beside me. I locked eyes with her, and for the first time, I saw fear in her. Not fear of losing power, but fear of losing everything she built on it. She raised her clipboard high. "You don't understand. Without rules, there is no community." I stepped closer, my voice low but strong enough for all to hear. "No, without people, there is no community, and the people are done with you." The enforcers shifted nervously. They looked at the crowd, at the dozens of phones recording, at the anger boiling in every pair of eyes. They realized they were outnumbered, outmatched, and most of all, unwanted, one by one. They stepped back, leaving Whitaker standing alone. Her voice cracked. "You can't do this to me. I built this place." I shook my head slowly. "No, you poisoned it." The crowd roared with approval. Her power, her image, shattered in the very street she claimed to own. But as she turned and stormed back to her SUV, she hissed one last promise. "This isn't over, not until one of us is gone." The crowd watched her drive away. Neighbors hugged, cheered, cried tears of relief. But I didn't cheer, because I knew her words were true. She wouldn't stop. Not until the war ended one way or another. The night Whitaker swore it wasn't over. I believed her. People like her don't disappear quietly. They claw. They scratch. They burn everything down if it means they don't lose, for days after the showdown. The neighborhood felt like it was holding its breath. The streets were quiet again, but not with fear this time, with tension, like everyone was waiting for the storm we knew was coming. The letters stopped. The SUVs didn't cruise past anymore. No enforcers on the sidewalks. It was silence, but the wrong kind of silence. The kind that meant something was building in the dark. I checked the locks every night, kept a bat by the bed, slept light. Every sound jolting me awake. My daughter tried to stay brave, but I could see it in her eyes. She was tired of living like prey in our own home. Then, it happened. 2 weeks after the recall petition, I came home late from work. The street was too quiet. No porch lights, no kids' bikes left out, just stillness. And then I saw it, spray paint across my garage door, huge letters dripping red in the glow of the street lamp. Traitor, my blood bowl. I yanked open the garage, found another note on the hood of my truck. Leave before she does. My daughter stood behind me, her voice shaking. Dad, I don't want to live here anymore. For a moment, I thought about it, packing up, walking away, leaving the war behind. But then I looked at her, and I knew I couldn't. If we left, Whitaker won, and if she won here, she'd win everywhere that weekend. The recall election was held. The community center was packed, neighbors shoulder to shoulder, some nervous, others eager. The air buzzed like static. At the front, Whitaker sat behind the table, her hair perfect, her smile forced, her eyes sharp as broken glass. When the ballots were counted, the room went silent. Her reign was over. The vote wasn't close. She was removed as president. Her board dissolved. For the first time in years, the neighborhood was free. Cheers erupted. People hugged, clapped, cried. Some shouted my name. Others patted my shoulder. But I didn't celebrate, because Whitaker didn't move from her chair. Her face was stone, her eyes locked on mine, and she whispered across the room, so soft I almost didn't hear. This is not the end. She stood, gathered her clipboard, and walked out. No words, no fight, just a shadow leaving the room. But I knew better. I knew she wasn't done, and I was right. That night, I heard glass shatter in the living room. I grabbed the bat, rushed downstairs, and there she was. Whitaker, standing in my home, her hair wild, her glasses gone, eyes blazing with rage, in her hand, a knife. This neighborhood was mine, she hissed. I built it. I controlled it. And you ruined it. My daughter screamed from the stairs. I raised the bat. My heart pounding. For a second, the world froze. It was just me, her, and the weight of everything we had fought for. She lunged. The knife glinted under the light. Swung the bat. Hard. The blade clattered to the floor. She stumbled back, crashing into the coffee table, gasping for breath. Neighbors pounded on the windows, shouting, because they had heard the scream too. Phones raised, cameras recording, the whole street watching through the glass. Whitaker looked up at me, her eyes filled with something I had never seen in her before. Not rage, not control, but fear. The police arrived minutes later. This time, they didn't look away. This time, they put the cuffs on her wrists, dragged her out of my house while the neighborhood cheered. It was over. Weeks passed. The new HOA board formed, fair, transparent, actually neighbors instead of tyrants. The fines stopped, the threats ended, the lawns looked the same. But the air felt lighter, for the first time. It actually felt like home. My daughter smiled again, laughed again, slept without fear again. And for me, that was the only victory that mattered. But sometimes, late at night, I still think about her, Whitaker. The woman who thought she owned us all. The woman who smiled with her eyes full of poison. And I wonder where people like her come from. What makes someone cling to power so tightly they'd rather destroy themselves than let go? Because in the end, she didn't lose to me. She lost to the truth. And the truth was simple. You can control houses, lawns, fences, but you can never truly control people. Not forever. Now I'll ask you something. If someone like Whitaker ruled your neighborhood and tried to take everything from you, would you fight until the very end like I did? Or would you walk away and let them win?